This story is not just about a mother. It is about a heart so strong it carried an entire world on its shoulders. And yet, that same heart ended up breaking inside the very house it had helped build. It is the story of a woman who worked herself to the bone, sacrificed dreams and comfort, and gave every piece of her soul for her son's future, only to grow older and discover a cruel twist of fate. Instead of resting in the love she deserved, she became nothing more than a servant in her own son's home, cleaning and bending under the sharp tongue of the woman he chose to marry. This, dear listener, is not a tale of fairy tale endings. It is a story soaked in sacrifice, scarred by betrayal, and shining with a painful but essential truth. What it really means to be a good mother, and the price that love sometimes demands. Get comfortable, because this story will stir your heart. And before we step into it, a quick welcome to anyone new here. You've found a place where stories breathe, and where truths are spoken gently but powerfully. And if this journey touches you, do not forget. Help us grow this space by subscribing and sharing. Now, let us begin the journey. Margaret sat quietly in her modest kitchen, her thin fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. The little room was filled with the smell of strong black tea, but to her it smelled mostly of memory. Each curl of steam that rose from the cup felt like a fragment of her past floating back to her. She was 70 years old now, gray-haired and fragile in body, but inside, her soul carried decades of resilience and fire. She had walked through many seasons of life, but as she sat staring across the table, she realized nothing had prepared her for what was unfolding in this final season of her years. Her tired eyes rested on one object she never moved: the old framed photograph on the table. It showed her late husband, Robert, with his arms wrapped lovingly around their only son, little Paul, barely a year old then. 35 years had passed, but to Margaret it felt like yesterday. Back then, their lives were simple. Their pockets were nearly empty, but their little home echoed with laughter and love. Margaret touched the edge of the frame gently. If only Robert could see Paul now, she whispered, her voice breaking in the silence. When Robert was killed in that sudden car accident, Paul was only 10 years old. That day shattered everything Margaret knew. The world collapsed in pieces around her feet. She was left alone with her grief, a son to raise, and a future full of shadows. But Margaret made a decision. She would not crumble. She would not break. She would choose strength, not for herself, but for her child. Those years after Robert's death became her battlefield. Margaret worked harder than any person should have to. 2 jobs, sometimes 3. By day, she scrubbed offices downtown until her hands were raw. At night, she put on her apron and served coffee and late-night pie to weary strangers at the local diner. She came home when the moon was high, her body aching, her shoes worn thin. Her feet throbbed, her back burned, her hands stung. But when she opened the door and saw the glow of that small kitchen lamp, and Paul bent over his school books, all the pain melted away like mist. "Did you eat dinner, honey?" she always asked, her voice soft but tired. "Yes, Mom. I saved you some," Paul would reply, pointing towards a covered plate waiting on the stove. But Margaret knew her boy too well. She knew that more often than not, there wasn't enough food for 2 full plates. Paul had split his portion, eating only half and saving the rest for her. He never once complained of hunger, though his small frame betrayed the truth. He was a good boy. Too good, Margaret thought sometimes, for this hard world. And when she herself skipped meals, lying to him that she'd already eaten on her break, she knew it was the kind of lie born from love, the kind only a mother tells. Every night, before shutting her weary eyes, Margaret whispered the same promise to herself. "My son will have a better life than this. Whatever it takes." She sold her wedding ring to buy him shoes for school. She worked double shifts so he could join the soccer team with pride. And when his dreams stretched higher, to college, Margaret began saving spare coins, nickels and dimes, until slowly they grew into something more. "Mom, you don't have to do all this for me," Paul would tell her, his voice serious as he grew older. "Nonsense," she would answer, wrapping her arms around him, as if by holding him tighter she could shield him from the whole world. "You're my boy. This is what mothers do." Paul kept his end of her sacrifices. He worked hard, studied diligently, and troubles never followed him. He grew into the kind of young man any mother would be proud to claim. And when the day of his high school graduation arrived, Margaret sat in the bleachers with tears streaming freely down her face. Later, when that college acceptance letter came, she cried again. This time with the pride of knowing all those endless nights had finally borne fruit. She paid his first year with her savings, and when he earned the scholarship for the rest, she nearly burst with joy. 4 years later, Margaret sat in an old but neatly pressed dress, watching her son stride across the college graduation stage as a man. She clapped until her palms stung. When Paul hugged her afterward, saying, "I did it, Mom," she shook her head with tears shining in her eyes. "No, honey," she corrected softly. "We did it." And indeed they had. Paul's new job in the city soon followed, and life began to change. He found a place of his own, a fine apartment, and success seemed finally within reach. He visited Margaret every week, bringing groceries, fixing broken things around her house, gently teasing her when she refused the money he tried to press into her hands. "Keep your money, Paul," she always said firmly. "Save it for your future. You'll thank me one day, when you have a wife and children to care for." Margaret's one dream, the dream that kept her spirit alive, was simple: to see Paul happily settled with a family of his own. She pictured little grandchildren running through her door, sticky hands reaching for cookies, holiday dinners with laughter spilling into every corner. And then, 2 years later, the phone call came. Paul's voice was bright with happiness as he told her about Lisa. Margaret's heart swelled. At last, her son had found a woman to love, someone to share this life she had fought so hard to give him. She cooked for days, preparing the first dinner Lisa would attend. She scrubbed until the house gleamed, even hung new curtains in the living room, wanting everything perfect when this woman stepped into their lives. And when Lisa did finally walk through that door, elegant, polished, radiant, Margaret felt her heart leap. She seemed like everything a mother could want for her son. That Sunday evening, Margaret's house rang with laughter and chatter. Lisa praised the food, asked questions about Paul's younger years, and even stayed behind to help clean up. When she smiled at Margaret, saying, "You raised an amazing man," Margaret thought her heart might burst from pride. In the following months, Lisa's presence became familiar, even cherished. She brought flowers, small gifts, or offered to take Margaret shopping. For every gentle gesture, Margaret's heart loosened, believing her son had truly found someone worthy of him. And then came the engagement. And then, the wedding. Margaret's sacrifices, her years of labor and hunger and silent prayers, had led here. To seeing her son in love, successful, secure. At the wedding reception, Lisa hugged her tightly, promising to take good care of Paul. Margaret, beaming with joy, welcomed her into the family without reservation. They bought a large home soon after, and when news of the baby arrived, Margaret nearly floated with joy. She would finally be a grandmother. And the day baby Emma was born, Margaret's love only deepened, as she held the tiny bundle and whispered words only a grandmother would understand. "This is why I sacrificed. This is why I carried it all." But little did Margaret know what shadows awaited her. She couldn't have seen through Lisa's bright smiles, her practiced words. Behind those perfect eyes lay a heart colder than she ever imagined. What lay ahead would change everything. What awaited was not a dream, but a test she never thought she would face. Because sometimes the very ones we trust the most are the ones who betray us deepest. And sometimes, even after giving everything, a mother finds herself forced into a role she never imagined. One she would never wish on anyone, a servant in her own son's house. And the first signs of it all arrived quietly, almost too small to notice. 3 months after Emma was born, Paul asked his mother for help. "Lisa needs to rest, Mom. Would you mind helping with the baby?" he said. Margaret's heart swelled with yes before the words even left her lips. Of course she would help. Of course she would shoulder the work. "Of course I'll help," she said immediately. "Whatever you need." So Margaret began visiting Paul and Lisa's house every day. She would arrive in the morning and help with Emma's feedings, diaper changes, and nap times. She cooked meals and did light housework. It felt wonderful to be needed and useful again. For the first few weeks, everything seemed perfect. Lisa was grateful for the help. She would thank Margaret constantly and tell her what a wonderful grandmother she was. "I don't know what I'd do without you," Lisa would say, bouncing Emma gently in her arms. But then Paul went back to work after his paternity leave ended, and that's when everything changed. The first morning Paul left for the office, Margaret arrived at the house as usual. She knocked on the front door and waited. When Lisa opened it, her face looked different. The warm smile was gone. Instead, Lisa looked annoyed. "You're late," Lisa said coldly. Margaret checked her watch. She was actually 5 minutes early, just like always. "I'm sorry, dear." "I thought I was on time," Margaret said gently. Lisa didn't respond. She just turned and walked back into the house, leaving Margaret to follow behind. In the kitchen, Emma was crying in her high chair. Her face was red and she seemed hungry. "She's been fussing all morning," Lisa said, sitting down at the kitchen table with her coffee. "I haven't had time to feed her yet." Margaret looked at Lisa confused. The baby was clearly hungry and needed attention. Why was Lisa just sitting there? Would you like me to prepare her bottle? Margaret offered. That's why you're here, isn't it? Lisa replied sharply. Margaret felt a little sting from those words, but she pushed the feeling aside. Lisa was probably just tired from being up with the baby all night. New mothers often felt overwhelmed. As Margaret prepared Emma's bottle, she tried to make conversation. How did she sleep last night? Margaret asked. Terrible. She cried for hours. I barely got any rest, Lisa complained. Margaret picked up Emma and began feeding her. The baby immediately calmed down and drank hungrily. Poor little thing was so hungry, Margaret said softly, stroking Emma's cheek. Well, maybe if you got here earlier, she wouldn't have had to wait, Lisa snapped. Margaret looked up, surprised by the harsh tone. This didn't sound like the sweet woman who had married Herson. Lisa, is everything okay? You seem upset, Margaret said carefully. Lisa's expression changed instantly. The anger disappeared and was replaced by a tired smile. I'm sorry, Margaret. You're right. I'm just exhausted. Having a baby is so much harder than I expected. Of course, dear. It's completely normal to feel overwhelmed. Why don't you go rest while I take care of Emma? That would be wonderful. Thank you. Lisa went upstairs, and Margaret spent the morning caring for her granddaughter. She changed Emma's diaper, played with her, and put her down for a nap. Then she cleaned the kitchen and started preparing lunch. When Lisa came downstairs an hour later, she seemed back to her normal, pleasant self. You're such a blessing, Margaret, she said. I don't know what we'd do without you. Margaret smiled, relieved. Maybe she had imagined the earlier tension. New mothers went through a lot of emotions. It was perfectly understandable. But the next day, the same thing happened. And the day after that, every morning, Lisa would greet Margaret with complaints and demands. Every afternoon when Paul came home, Lisa would transform back into the loving wife and mother. At first, Margaret thought it was just stress. But as the weeks went by, Lisa's behavior got worse. Margaret. Emma's crying again. Lisa would call from the living room. Can you handle it? I'm watching my show. Margaret, we're out of milk. Can you run to the store? Margaret, the laundry needs to be folded. I'm too tired. Slowly. Margaret realized she was doing more and more work while Lisa did less and less, but she didn't mind. She loved spending time with Emma, and if helping with chores made Lisa's life easier, she was happy to do it. The real shock came on a Tuesday morning in November. Margaret arrived at the house to find Lisa dressed in expensive clothes and putting on jewelry. Oh, good. You're here, Lisa said without looking up. Emma needs a bath. The dishes need washing, and I spilled coffee on the living room carpet. Clean it up before it stains. Of course, Margaret said. Are you going somewhere special? Lunch with friends. I'll be back around 4 hours. Lisa grabbed her purse and headed for the door. Then she stopped and turned around. Oh, and Margaret, make sure dinner is ready when Paul gets home. He likes that chicken recipe you made last week. Before Margaret could respond, Lisa was gone. Margaret stood in the hallway holding her coat, trying to understand what had just happened. Lisa had left her alone with the baby and a list of chores while she went out to enjoy herself with friends. But Margaret pushed down her confusion. Maybe Lisa needed some time with friends. Being a new mother was isolating. A little break would probably do her good. As the weeks passed, this became the new routine. Lisa would give Margaret a list of tasks each morning, then disappear for hours. Margaret would care for Emma, clean the house, do laundry, and prepare meals. When Paul came home each evening, Lisa would bet her waiting with a smile. She would thank Margaret for her help and tell Paul what a wonderful day they'd had together. Your mother is such a treasure, Lisa would say, squeezing Margaret's hand. I'm so lucky to have her. Paul would beam with pride. I'm glad you two get along so well. Margaret wanted to say something. She wanted to explain that she was doing all the work while Lisa went out shopping and socializing. But every time she tried to speak up, Lisa would give her a look that made her stay quiet. One evening, after Paul had gone to bed, Lisa cornered Margaret in the kitchen. We need to talk, Lisa said, her voice cold. What about, dear? About your attitude lately. You seem unhappy, Margaret was confused. I'm not unhappy. I love spending time with Emma. Good. Because I'd hate for Paul to think you don't want to help us. He works so hard to provide for this family. The last thing he needs is stress at home. I would never want to cause Paul stress, Margaret said. I'm glad we understand each other. Lisa smiled. But it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had just won a game. That night, Margaret lay in her own bed, staring at the ceiling. Something was very wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Lisa was manipulating the situation somehow, but Margaret didn't know how to prove it. The next morning brought a new shock. When Margaret arrived at the house, Lisa was waiting with a uniform. What's this? Margaret asked, looking at the gray dress and white apron. I thought it would be easier if you had proper clothes for housework. You keep getting your nice outfits dirty. Margaret stared at the uniform. It looked exactly like what a maid would wear. Lisa, I don't think I need a uniform. I'm just helping out as Emma's grandmother. Lisa's expression hardened. Margaret, let's be clear about something. You're not just helping out. You're working here. And if you're going to work in my house, you need to look professional. Your house, Margaret repeated quietly. That's right, my house. Paul bought this house for me and Emma. You're here because I allow it. Margaret felt like she'd been slapped. This was her son's house, too. She had helped raise the man who paid for it with his hard work. Now, Lisa continued, put on the uniform and get to work. Emma needs her breakfast, and I have plans. With shaking hands, Margaret took the uniform. She went to the bathroom and put it on. When she looked in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. She looked like a servant. When she came out, Lisa was already at the door with her purse. Much better, Lisa said with satisfaction. Oh, and Margaret, when Paul asks how your day was, tell him you had a lovely time with Emma and me. We wouldn't want him to worry about anything, would we? And with that threat hanging in the air, Lisa left Margaret alone in the big house, wearing a maid's uniform to care for the granddaughter she loved more than life itself. As Margaret fed Emma her bottle, tears fell down her cheeks. How had her dream of being a loving grandmother turned into this nightmare? And how could she tell Paul the truth when Lisa had made it clear that speaking up would only cause him pain? But the worst part was still to come because Lisa had plans that went far beyond making Margaret do housework. Plans that would break Margaret's heart in ways she never imagined possible. Winter arrived early that year, bringing cold winds and shorter days. But the chill outside was nothing compared to the coldness that had settled over Paul's house. Margaret had been wearing the gray uniform for 3 weeks now. Every morning she would put on the maid's dress and white apron, feeling a little piece of her dignity slip away. But she endured it for Emma. Her granddaughter was the light in this growing darkness. Lisa's demands had grown worse with each passing day. No longer content with just housework and childcare, she began treating Margaret like a servant in every way. Margaret, my coffee is cold, Lisa would call from the living room. Bring me a fresh cup. Margaret, I dropped my earring in the bathroom. Get on your hands and knees and find it. Margaret, the toilet needs scrubbing. Make sure you use the brush, not just spray. Each command felt like a small knife cutting into Margaret's heart. But she bit her tongue and did as she was asked. She told herself it was temporary. Things would get better somehow. The worst part was watching Lisa with Emma. When Paul was home, Lisa would hold the baby, coop over her, and play the perfect mother. But when Paul left for work, Lisa barely paid attention to her own daughter. She's crying again, Lisa would say with annoyance, as if Emma was bothering her on purpose. She's just hungry, dear, Margaret would say gently, reaching for the baby. Well, feed her then. That's what you're here for. Margaret would scoop Emma into her arms, feeling her heart break a little more. This beautiful child deserves so much better than a mother who saw her as an inconvenience. One December morning, Margaret arrived to find Lisa pacing in the kitchen with her phone pressed to her ear. I don't care what it costs, Lisa was saying to whoever was on the other end. I want the diamond earrings, not the pearl ones. Yes, charge it to Paul's card. When she hung up, she noticed Margaret standing there. Good, you're here. Emma has been screaming for an hour. Do something about it. Margaret hurried to the nursery and found Emma lying in her crib, her face red from crying. Her diaper was soaked and she was clearly hungry. Oh, sweet baby, Margaret whispered, picking her up. Grandma's here now. As Margaret changed Emma's diaper and prepared a bottle, she heard Lisa on the phone again, ordering expensive clothes online. While her daughter cried from hunger, Lisa was shopping with Paul's hard-earned money. That afternoon, something happened that changed everything. Margaret was folding laundry in the living room when Emma, now 8 months old, pulled herself up on the coffee table. She took her first wobbly steps toward Margaret, her little arms outstretched. Oh my goodness, Margaret gasped, dropping the clothes. Emma's walking. Lisa, come quick. She's taking her first steps. But Lisa didn't come running like any normal mother would. Instead, she appeared in the doorway with a frown on her face. What's all the noise about? She asked irritably. Emma just took her first steps. Isn't it wonderful? Lisa looked at her daughter, who was now clinging to Margaret's legs, and shrugged. She was bound to walk eventually. Clean up those clothes you dropped. Margaret stared at Lisa in shock. How could any mother be so cold about such an important milestone? Margaret wanted to call Paul immediately and share the exciting news, but Lisa's expression warned her not to. Later that evening, when Paul came home, Lisa was the one who announced the news. Guess what, honey? Emma took her first steps today, right to me in the kitchen. I was so excited I almost cried. Paul's face lit up with joy. Really? That's amazing. I'm sorry I missed it. Don't worry, I'm sure she'll do it again tomorrow. Your mom was here helping, but but she was busy doing laundry upstairs when it happened. Margaret opened her mouth to correct the lie, but Lisa shot her a warning look. Paul was so happy about Emma's milestone that Margaret couldn't bear to spoil his joy with the truth. But that lie was just the beginning. As the weeks passed, Lisa began telling Emma that Margaret wasn't her grandmother at all. "Emma, say hi to Margaret," Lisa would say when Paul wasn't around. "She's our maid. She cleans our house and takes care of you while I'm busy." At first, Emma was too young to understand, but as she got bigger and started talking, the poison began to take effect. One day, Margaret was playing with Emma on the living room floor when the little girl looked up at her with innocent eyes. "Margaret clean?" Emma asked in her sweet baby voice. Margaret's heart stopped. "What did you say, sweetheart?" "Mama says, Margaret clean house." "Margaret maid." Tears sprang to Margaret's eyes. Her own granddaughter was calling her the maid. The child she had loved from the moment she was born didn't even know they were family. "Emma, I'm your grandma," Margaret whispered, stroking the little girl's hair. "Your daddy is my son. That makes me your grandma." But Emma just looked confused. "Mama says Margaret work here." That evening, Margaret tried to speak to Lisa about it. "Lisa, Emma thinks I'm just the maid. She doesn't understand that I'm her grandmother." Lisa smiled coldly. "Children say the strangest things, don't they? I can't control what comes out of her mouth. But you're telling her that I'm not family. You're poisoning her against me." "I'm not doing anything," Lisa said with false innocence. "I'm just explaining your role in this house. You do work here after all. You clean, you cook, you do laundry. That's what maids do." "I'm not a maid. I'm Paul's mother and Emma's grandmother." Lisa's expression turned dangerous. "Keep your voice down, and remember what I told you about causing problems. Paul doesn't need to hear about your complaints. He has enough stress at work." Margaret felt trapped. Every time she tried to stand up for herself, Lisa used Paul as a weapon against her. The threat was always the same. Don't upset Paul. Don't cause him worry. Don't make his life harder. The final blow came on a snowy Thursday in January. Margaret was scrubbing the kitchen floor on her hands and knees when she heard Emma in the living room talking to her toys. "Grandma Lisa loves Emma," the little girl was saying in her precious voice. "Grandma Lisa buys toys. Margaret cleans Emma's mess." Margaret sat back on her heels, her heart shattering into a million pieces. Lisa had not only convinced Emma that Margaret was the maid, but she had also stolen the title of grandma for herself. That afternoon, when Paul came home early from work with flowers for Lisa, Margaret was in the laundry room folding clothes. She could hear the family in the living room laughing and playing together. "Say hi to Grandma Lisa," she heard Paul say to Emma. "Hi, Grandma." Emma giggled. Paul's laughter filled the house. "That's right, sweetheart. Grandma Lisa loves you so much." Margaret had to grip the washing machine to keep from falling over. Her son was calling his wife Grandma, while his real mother was hidden away in the laundry room like a servant. She wanted to march into that living room and tell Paul everything. She wanted to explain how Lisa had been treating her, how she had been lying and manipulating the situation. She wanted her son to know that his mother was being broken down piece by piece. But every time she gathered the courage, she would see Paul's happy face or hear Emma's innocent laughter, and she would lose her nerve. Lisa was right about one thing. Paul did work very hard. He deserved to come home to a peaceful house and a happy family. So Margaret stayed in the shadows, loving her granddaughter from a distance, serving in the house that should have been a second home to her, and watching as her identity was slowly erased. But she didn't know that change was coming. She couldn't have guessed that sometimes the truth has a way of revealing itself, no matter how deeply it's buried. And she never imagined that Paul was beginning to notice small things that didn't quite add up. Because while Lisa was busy playing her games, she was getting careless. And when someone you love is in danger, a mother's love has a way of finding the light, even in the darkest places. The breaking point came on a gray February morning, exactly 1 year after Emma was born. Margaret arrived at the house as usual, her key turning in the lock she had been given months ago. But instead of Lisa's demanding voice greeting her, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Emma was crying. Not the normal fussing of a baby, but the desperate wailing of a child in distress. Margaret rushed toward the sound and found Emma in her high chair, her face red and tear-streaked. The baby had clearly been crying for a very long time. "Emma, oh, sweetheart, what's wrong?" Margaret quickly lifted her granddaughter from the chair. Emma's diaper was soaked through. Her clothes were wet, and she was burning up with fever. She had obviously been sick and alone for hours. "Lisa!" Margaret called out, her voice echoing through the house. "Lisa! Emma is sick." There was no answer. Margaret carried Emma upstairs, calling Lisa's name. She found Lisa's bedroom door closed. When she knocked, she heard movement inside. "Lisa, please. Emma has a fever." The door opened slightly, and Lisa appeared looking annoyed and groggy. She was still in her pajamas at 10 in the morning. What are you shouting about? Lisa snapped. Emma is burning up with fever. How long has she been like this? Lisa shrugged. She was fussy when I put her in the high chair this morning. I thought she was just being difficult. Margaret stared at Lisa in horror. You left a sick baby alone in her chair while you went back to bed. She wasn't dying, and you're here now, so handle it. Lisa started to close the door, but Margaret's patience finally snapped. No, Margaret said firmly, pushing the door open. This stops right now. Emma needs to see a doctor immediately. Don't you dare raise your voice to me in my house, Lisa hissed. This is my son's house too, and this is my granddaughter, and she needs medical attention. For the first time in months, Margaret stood up for herself. She was tired of being treated like a servant. She was exhausted from walking on eggshells. But most importantly, Emma needed her grandmother to be strong. Lisa's face twisted with anger. You forget your place, old woman. You work for me now. I don't work for anybody, Margaret said, her voice shaking but determined. I'm Paul's mother, and I won't let you neglect his daughter anymore. We'll see about that, Lisa sneered. When Paul gets home, I'll tell him how ungrateful and disrespectful you've become. How you've been causing problems and upsetting our peaceful home. But Margaret had reached her limit. Tell him whatever you want, but right now I'm taking Emma to the doctor. Margaret turned and walked away, carrying the feverish baby. Behind her, Lisa was screaming threats, but Margaret didn't care anymore. Emma's health was more important than Lisa's games. At the doctor's office, Margaret learned that Emma had a serious ear infection that had been developing for days. The doctor gave her medicine and instructions, then looked at Margaret with concern. Is this your daughter? The doctor asked. My granddaughter? I've been caring for her. Well, you did the right thing bringing her in. This infection was getting dangerous. A few more hours of neglect could have led to serious complications. The word neglect hit Margaret like a punch to the stomach. That's exactly what had been happening. While she had been focused on keeping the peace, Emma had been neglected by her own mother. That afternoon, Margaret sat in her small house rocking Emma and giving her medicine. She had called Paul at work to explain about the doctor visit, but she hadn't told him the whole truth about Lisa's behavior. Not yet, but she knew the time for silence was over. Emma's health scare had shown her that protecting Paul's feelings wasn't worth risking his daughter's safety. Margaret was preparing to call Paul again when she heard a car door slam outside. Through her window, she saw Paul's car in the driveway. He was home from work early. Her front door burst open and Paul strode in, his face filled with worry. Mom, how's Emma? Is she okay? She's better now, honey. The medicine is helping. Paul sat down beside them, gently touching Emma's forehead. Lisa told me what happened. She said, you overreacted and took Emma to the doctor without permission. Margaret took a deep breath. This was her moment. She could either continue protecting Lisa's lies, or she could finally tell her son the truth. Paul, we need to talk. What about Mom? About Lisa? About what's really been happening in your house? Paul frowned. What do you mean? Lisa says you've been having some attitude problems lately, that you've been difficult to work with. Margaret looked at her son, this man she had sacrificed everything for and made her choice. Paul, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be hard to hear. For the next hour, Margaret told Paul everything. She described how Lisa treated her when he wasn't around. She explained about the uniform, the demands, the way Lisa had convinced Emma that Margaret was just the maid. She told him about Lisa's shopping sprees with his money while Emma went hungry. She described how Lisa would disappear for hours, leaving Margaret to do all the childcare and housework. Most importantly, she told him about that morning. How Lisa had left a sick baby alone while she slept in. Paul listened in stunned silence. His face went through a range of emotions. Disbelief, confusion, and finally growing anger. Mom, this can't be true. Lisa loves Emma. She loves our family. Paul, I know this is hard to accept, but look at Emma right now. Really? Look at her. Paul looked down at his daughter. Even though the medicine was helping, he could see how sick she had been. Her little face was pale, and she clung to Margaret like her lifeline. Lisa said Emma was just fussy this morning. She didn't mention anything about a fever because she didn't check. Honey, she put Emma in that high chair hours ago and went back to bed. If I hadn't arrived when I did, Margaret didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Paul stood up and began pacing the small living room. If what you're saying is true, then I've been blind to everything. I've let my wife abuse my mother and neglect my daughter. You didn't know, Paul. Lisa is very good at hiding her true nature when you're around. But I should have seen these signs. I should have protected you both. Margaret reached out and touched her son's hand. You're seeing them now. That's what matters. The next morning, Paul did something he had never done before. He called in sick to work and stayed home to watch what really happened in his house. He told Lisa he had a stomach bug and would be resting upstairs. But instead, he positioned himself where he could see and hear everything that went on downstairs. What he witnessed that day changed everything. He watched Lisa hand Margaret a list of chores like she was giving orders to hired help. He heard her demand that Margaret scrub the bathroom floor on her hands and knees. He saw her ignore Emma's cries while she talked on the phone about shopping. Most shocking of all, he heard Lisa tell Emma that Margaret the maid would give her lunch while Grandma Lisa went out with friends. By noon, Paul had seen enough. When Lisa announced she was leaving for a spa appointment, Paul waited 10 minutes, then came downstairs. What he witnessed that day changed everything. He watched Lisa hand Margaret a list of chores like she was giving orders to hired help. He heard her demand that Margaret scrub the bathroom floor on her hands and knees. He saw her ignore Emma's cries while she talked on the phone about shopping. Most shocking of all, he heard Lisa tell Emma that Margaret the maid would give her lunch while Grandma Lisa went out with friends. By noon, Paul had seen enough. When Lisa announced she was leaving for a spa appointment, Paul waited 10 minutes, then came downstairs. He found Margaret in the kitchen wearing that gray uniform feeding Emma while tears streamed down her face. "Mom," Paul said quietly. Margaret looked up, startled. "Paul, I thought you were sick upstairs." "I was sick, Mom. Sick of being blind to the truth." Paul walked over and gently took Emma from Margaret's arms. Then he did something that made Margaret's heart soar. He hugged his mother tightly. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I let this happen to you." Margaret began to cry harder, but now they were tears of relief. "You believe me?" she asked. "I saw it all, Mom. I heard everything. Lisa has been lying to me for months." That evening, when Lisa returned from her spa day, Paul was waiting for her in the living room. Margaret had gone home, and Emma was safely tucked in her crib. "Hi, honey," Lisa said brightly. "Feeling better? Where's your mother?" "We need to talk, Lisa." Something in Paul's tone made Lisa stop smiling. "I know everything," Paul said simply. "I know how you've been treating my mother. I know about the uniform, the chores, the lies you've been telling Emma." Lisa's face went pale, but she tried to maintain her innocent act. "Paul, I don't know what your mother told you, but I saw it myself." "Lisa, I stayed home today and watched you treat my mother like a servant in our house." The mask finally fell away completely. Lisa's sweet expression disappeared, replaced by cold anger. "So what if I did? She was living here for free, eating our food, making messes. At least this way she was useful." Paul stared at the woman he had married, hardly recognizing her. "That woman raised me by herself. She worked 2 jobs and went without food so I could have a better life. She deserves respect and love, not abuse." "Oh, please," Lisa scoffed. "She's just a sad old woman who couldn't let go of her precious son. She's Emma's grandmother. She's family." "She's nothing," Lisa spat, just like this. "Marriage is nothing if you choose her over me." Paul looked at Lisa for a long moment. Then he spoke the words that would change everything. "Then I choose her." 3 months later, Paul and Lisa were divorced. Lisa moved out of the house, taking only her personal belongings. Paul had discovered that she had been having an affair for months, using his money to fund her lifestyle while neglecting their daughter. On a beautiful spring morning, Margaret arrived at Paul's house, but this time she came through the front door as an honored guest, not through the back door as a servant. "Grandma!" Emma called out, running to Margaret on steady little legs. "Hello, my sweet girl," Margaret said, scooping up her granddaughter. "Did you miss me?" "Missed you, Grandma. Play with me." Paul smiled as he watched his mother and daughter together. She's been asking for her real grandma all week. Margaret's heart was full as she played with Emma in the living room where she had once scrubbed floors on her hands and knees. The gray uniform was long gone, replaced by a pretty blue dress that Paul had bought her. "Mom," Paul said as they sat down for the lunch Margaret had prepared. "By choice, not by demand." "Yes, honey. Thank you for never giving up on us. Even when things were at their worst, you never stopped loving Emma and me." Margaret smiled, watching Emma play with her toys. "That's what mothers do, Paul. We love our children no matter what. Even when it's hard, even when it hurts. I know I can never make up for what I put you through. You don't need to make up for anything. We're together now. We're a family again. That's all I ever wanted." As they sat in the warm afternoon sun, watching Emma toddle around the garden, Margaret reflected on everything that had happened. She had learned that sometimes the people we trust can hurt us deeply. She had discovered that staying silent in the face of abuse only makes it worse. But most importantly, she had learned that real family love is stronger than lies, stronger than manipulation, and stronger than the cruelest treatment. She had been broken down, made to feel worthless, and treated like a servant in her own son's house. But in the end, truth had won, love had won, and the family that had been torn apart was now whole again. Emma ran over and climbed into Margaret's lap, her little arms wrapping around her grandmother's neck. "Love you, Grandma," Emma whispered. "I love you too, sweetheart," Margaret replied, her heart overflowing with joy, forever and always. And in that moment, Margaret knew that every sacrifice, every tear, and every moment of pain had been worth it. Because this love, this family, this bond that could never be broken, this was what really mattered. Sometimes becoming a maid in your son's house teaches you the most important lesson of all, that real family love can survive anything, and that the truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds a way to shine through the darkness. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story has moved you, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your family and friends, and subscribe for more stories like this one. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell. Until next time, be kind to one.